Thank you. Yeah, so welcome to the Orange County Transportation Council Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, as it will be referred to, update for the federal fiscal year 2023 through 2027 public presentation. Next slide. So the presentation outline will just give a brief overview of the Orange County Transportation Council, or OCTC, and the TIP. We'll highlight previous TIP accomplishments and then dive into the draft of the fiscal year 2023 through 2027 Transportation Improvement Program. We'll give an outline of the update process, the financial overview and plan, as well as highlight some of the projects on the draft TIP. And then we'll end with concluding remarks and how to access the draft TIP and provide an opportunity for public comment before closing out. The Orange County Transportation Council is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for Orange County. MPOs are established by the governor for urbanized areas with populations greater than 50,000. The OCTC is also part of the Mid-Hudson Valley Transportation Management Area, or TMA, with Ulster County Transportation Council and Dutchess County Transportation Council. The OCTC is a consortium and cannot enter into contracts. Therefore, Orange County acts as its host agency to the MPO. The OCTC is comprised of a planning committee, which is represented by all municipalities in Orange County, and a policy board. The council is a consensus-based decision-making body and is responsible for the continuing, comprehensive, and collaborative transportation planning process. The council, or the OCTC board, is comprised of permanent voting members on a rotating basis, and permanent non-voting members. So for more information on the makeup of the OCTC and its planning committee and policy board, you can reference the operating procedures, which are located on the OCTC website. The OCTC is required to develop 3 core documents: the long-range transportation plan, which is a long-range plan with a 20-year planning horizon, that was last updated in November 2019. It's updated every 4 years, so we'll be looking for our next iteration of the LRTP in November 2023. So that work will begin shortly. There's also the Unified Planning Work Program, which is the annual work program, and that is updated with the state fiscal year, begins April 1st. And finally, the Transportation Improvement Program. So what is the Transportation Improvement Program? It is, also known as the TIP, is a 5-year capital program for federal funded transportation projects. It follows the federal fiscal year, which runs October 1st through September 30th. You can go to the next slide. And includes projects on local highway, transit, bridge, New York State Bridge Authority projects, New York State Thruway Authority projects, MTA Metro North projects, and NYSDOT multi-county projects. The TIP must be fiscally constrained, which means that the proposed improvements must balance the cost with the expected revenues to be available. Finally, each MPO and rural program are compiled to create the State Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP. And the STIP is a 4-year program, with the MPO's TIP being a 5-year capital program. So the types of projects on the TIP, and some examples include, but are not limited to, bridge projects, traffic improvement projects, bicycle and pedestrian projects, transit projects, safety projects, etc. So how to read the TIP. So this is what we would refer to as a TIP strip. So it includes a project is given a unique ID or a PIN number, and projects are broken out by phase and funding by fiscal year. And the how to read the TIP is available on the OCTC website, and it is also included in the appendix of the TIP narrative. So before we dive into the fiscal year 2023-2027 draft TIP, I wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments that were constructed during the 2020-2024 TIP cycle. And so some of the projects completed include Route 208 sidewalk project in the village of Walden, the Heritage Trail extension from Hartley Road to downtown Middletown, East Main Street Bridge rehabilitation and the East Main Street reconstruction, and also the sidewalk and ADA improvements in the city of Port Jervis. You're standing next to it. And then the Lake Road Metro North Railroad Bridge replacement in the town of New Windsor. some projects that were obligated and are either current or going to go to construction or are currently in construction include the Orange County, oh. Go one more slide. Okay. Yeah, this one. So projects obligated, this includes the Orange County Safety Improvements Project, which was funded through a statewide solicitation of the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, or PSAP. So there's, how many locations intersect?
Don't
Oh, I put it, okay.
quite a few.
In the village and town of Cornwall, construction began in 2021, and they're expecting the project completed sometime at the end of 2022. And then we also have the Lake Drive Bridge over the Quasay Creek project. Staff was lucky enough a few years ago to go out to the city of Newburgh and see this project. So you can see the buckling of the culverts from the rotting of it. So the culverts were replaced with a bridge. The bridge includes sidewalks and also has space for, I guess, a future trail connection, the Quasay Creek Trail. And then some other projects, go back. Sorry, can you go back? It's out of order. One more. Yep, so these are projects that were obligated for construction. The City of Middletown Traffic Operations was a $30 million project altogether and upgrades 28 intersections and ADA sidewalk improvements, and was authorized to begin construction in May 2021. And the project will continue phase construction through fiscal year 2024. We also have the Warwick Bike Route and Pedestrian Trail, which was obligated but has not been constructed yet. The Lake Street and Stage Road pedestrian improvements, which was a TAP project in the village of Monroe, and then the town of Crawford pedestrian improvements, which I believe was just obligated in August. So I wanted to highlight these because the COVID pandemic had a substantial impact on the MPO. Though the council continued to meet virtually throughout the pandemic, we did see a lot of ongoing trends with the fiscal year 2020-2024 TIP, mainly the increased funding of costs for construction and construction inspection due to increased demand of labor and supply chain issues. So the OCTC saw many funding requests from members due to the differences in the original project estimation and final estimation bidding prices. This impacted project timelines and further increased construction costs, and it often fell on local project sponsors to make up for that funding gap. So this greatly impacted the TIP development process, especially you'll see in the first 2 years, there's a lot of construction projects that were rolled into fiscal year 2023 and 2024 on this draft TIP. So I did want to mention that. So now we'll go to the TIP update process and key milestones. So the update process. So what is the TIP update process? It is outlined in CFR or 23 CFR 450.326, and that is the development and content of the Transportation Improvement Program. So the TIP shall be developed for the metropolitan planning area, which is Orange County, in cooperation with NISDOT and affected public transportation operators. And that was represented by Transit Orange staff who work closely with the transit operators. It also needs to reflect investment priorities established in the current long-range transportation plan, provide all interested parties with the opportunity to comment on the proposed TIP, provide at least one formal public meeting, and will be published and made readily available for public review. So some of the highlights for the update process. So we began meeting with existing project sponsors in December and January 2022 to review existing projects so that costs, scopes, and schedules reflected the most up-to-date information available. And then in March 25th, 2022, NISDOT circulated the fiscal targets and instructions to MPOs. We held multiple TIP development discussions during the OCTC Planning Committee meetings. And we had concurrence from the planning committee to move forward on the draft program at the August 9th, 2022 planning committee meeting. And so we started after that, we started the consultation process, especially with the interagency consultation group for air quality, beginning in August 2022. So the draft OCTC tip. So as stated, NISDOT released the planning targets for MPOs on March 25th. The regional targets were developed without assumptions of the new surface transportation authorization. While the bipartisan infrastructure law is a once-in-a-generation investment on transportation system and provided planning stability and guaranteed funding levels, it was mostly targeted at two programs, the new Supplemental Bridge Formula Program and the National Highway Performance Program. Other funding programs are largely distributed through discretionary programs, such as competitive solicitations and new formula programs. And those are still being developed throughout the summer. Like Dalian. So it's important to remember that the targets are for planning purposes and do not represent a commitment of funding on behalf of FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, and or New York State Department of Transportation. So the TIP financial overview. TIP financial plans are required per CFR 23 Part 450 326 I or J. And it must demonstrate how the TIP can be implemented, indicate resources from public and private sources that are reasonably expected to be available to carry out the program, and identifies innovative financing techniques to finance projects, programs, and strategies. And the TIP financial plan must also demonstrate fiscal constraint. So here, just to highlight, here are the Region 8 targets. The Region 8 program includes local program targets for the MPOs. Those MPOs include Orange County Transportation Council, the Mid-Hudson South TCC, which is part of the New York City Metropolitan Transportation Council, or NIMTIC, Dutchess County Transportation Council, Ulster County Transportation Council, and CTAC, which is the Columbia Transportation Committee. They are not an MPO. But they do have a transportation committee. And then NISDOT. So we presented this, I think, back in April or May, the breakdown of the funding. It's largely about 70% of the total Regional 8 program goes to NISDOT, with Orange County seeing just 5% of the overall program. And then you can go to the next one. So the local program targets, here's a snapshot of the targets we received for the local program. For OCTC, there's approximately 40 million over the next 5 years for planning purposes, which breaks out to almost 8 million a year. And that's 18.5 million for CMAC, 18.7 in STBG large urban, and 4.4 million in the STBG off-system bridge. So those are the three core funding programs that OCTC receives and must fiscally constrained. And so I'll give a brief program overview, and these are estimates. So this may change slightly in the final version. But so the local program includes a total of 21 projects with just over 49 million in core federal aid funding. Not all of that counts against the targets because some of it is rolling over from the current TIP onto the new draft TIP. And about 4.2 million is in the discretionary funding like TAP and STBG, or the TAP flags, safe routes to school, whatnot. So it totals just over 50 million on the local program. The New York State DOT projects include bridge, highway, safety, and mobility projects. There's a total of 15 in Orange County, with over almost 125 million in federal aid funding and 85 million in state funds. And there's 5 multi-county projects on the OCTC TIP, which is just under 10 million. And then finally, the transit program, which uses FTA funding for the operation, maintenance, and purchase for future capital projects on the transit system. and OCTC's programming is just over 100 million over the next 5 years. So the total program funding in the OC planning area, there's going to be just under 300 million in federal aid funding programmed over the next 5 years. 187 million is FHWA funding and 105 million is the FTA funding. And with the state and local matches that are required, we're looking at almost $410 million to be programmed over the next 5 years, planned to be programmed over the next 5 years in Orange County. So we're definitely seeing a significant investment in infrastructure in Orange County. So a breakdown of some of the project highlights. For local projects, the city of Newburgh has a combined project with Broadway pedestrian traffic signal improvements and the traffic signal upgrades. And that's looking to go into construction in fiscal year 2024. The city of Middletown will continue the construction of its traffic operations improvements into the fiscal year 2023-2024. Orange County has 2 big projects programmed. You have the Heritage Trail Extension and also the Scunnamunk Trail construction, which will look to go in fiscal year 23 or 24. And that's using FTA 5307. And that's the first time we've used, Orange County has used FTA 5307 to construct a trail to connect to existing transit connections. There's also the Village of Curious Joel has a combined of just under 11 million in 3 projects. The roadway improvements, roadway and sidewalk improvements, and then the only new project going on the local program is the new park and ride lot expansion at the existing lot in Forest Road. And these projects are anticipated in construction in 2023 and 2025. And then finally, NISDOT has an operational and safety improvement project at State Route 94 and County Route 1A in the town of Warwick. For the transit project highlights, so the transit program consists of FTA 5307, 5310, 5311, and 5339 funding. Transit programs largely includes funding block pins for operation, service, and maintenance, as well as some capital purchases to ensure that OCTC and Transit Orange maintain a system that supports the state of good repair performance measures as outlined in the Transit Asset Management Plan. So their OCTC has a backlog, or Transit Orange has a backlog of transit funding from previous FTA grants that reach back to 2019 and total approximately 37 million for the 5307 funds and about 3 million for 5339 funds. So that is important to note because transit program is a little bit different than the highway program. So they'll program in grants, and you can also use older grants in projects. So like the Scunnamunk project is planned in 2023 for obligation, but it uses grants from I think 2017, 2018, 2019.
Yeah, we just pulled in, that's part of the current application so that those funds did not lapse.
Yeah, so while the transit program targets are a little bit lower than what we're programming, with the backlog, we do show fiscal constraint for the transit projects. And then the NISDOT project highlights. So the projects are mainly the NHPP and STVG flex funding, and also state funding. So there's 3 real big projects to highlight. That includes a almost 30 million project to replace Route 17M bridge over the Norfolk Southern NJ Transit Railroad in the town and village of Chester. $82 million project for the stage 2 construction of Route 17 exit 122 interchange in the town of Walk Hill, and then 12.3 million for a project for resurfacing I-84 from the Interstate 87 interchange to Route 208. So the next slide will shows the fiscal constraint table. This is also available in the OCTC tip narrative. And this shows the full tip is included in the project listings, the financial plan, and fiscal constraint table in the tip narrative.
Okay. Lauren, thank you. That's a very thorough overview. I want to take this opportunity really to thank Lauren in particular for pulling this all together, but also to acknowledge the other team members that also played a role. Donna Showalter, who's our new ArcGIS technician, Zach Coleman, who's our senior environmental planner, Jessica Ridgway, who's a planner who floats between land use, transit, transportation. So she's our all-around planner, and Rob Harrington, who's with us today, who heads up our transit unit. Also, want to acknowledge the contributions from New York State DOT, Sandra Jobson, Nicole Farmer, who's here with us, Jonathan Hill, Patrick Lentil contributed on the air quality. So there's a lot of coordination that goes into this process. Also, Travis Ewald here, County DPW. There is a lot of coordination between the agencies that goes into the development of this, and we just wanted to take a few minutes to acknowledge that. I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that following this presentation, I would again open it up if there are any members from the public that would have any comments or questions.
So we'll just briefly go over the tip timelines, what's next. So at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. We'll also be reviewing in the planning committee meeting, we'll review the fiscal year 2023-2027 tip, the tip narrative, the Orange County self-certification, and also the air quality transportation conformity determination. All these items will be available for public comment starting tomorrow, and it runs through October 7th. And the council will tentatively adopt the items at the October 11th policy board meeting. So how to access the draft. So the OCTC draft will be posted on the website at orangecountygov.com/OCTC. We'll have a link on the front page. We also have a new initiative, which is a ARC Hub site. We really wanted to create a more user-friendly experience. And we will view that in just a second. But that's also available to view. And we included that tip project screening tool as well. So it has all the local program projects, and you can look at the projects and compare it to the environmental justice areas and environmentally sensitive areas as well. And you can view where the projects are at, and it's a dynamic map. There'll be a printed copy at the Orange County Planning Department at 124 Main Street in Goshen, New York on the first floor. You can also request a copy by contacting OCTC staff. And as mentioned earlier, this public meeting is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube, on the OCTC YouTube channel for future viewing. And so to submit public comment, you have the opportunity at the end of the presentation. You can email octc@orangecountygov.com, or you can send comments via mail. They'll need to be received during the public comment period. If you need assistance in accessing the materials or sharing public comment, please call OCTC staff at 845-615-3840.
With that, I'll just ask once again if there are any members from the public that would like to speak.
I want to raise just one point of clarity. In the tip listing, on the draft listing, there is a few PIN numbers which seems to be like a catch-all, just holding money for future distribution. For example, CMAC. There is a listing for 8BLK01, which seems to be like a holding pot for CMEC funding, and the same as the next line, which seems to be a holding pot for also for this is surface transportation off system bridge, and the next one is a holding pot for STBG LG urban block. What's the process of distribution from these three holding pins for it seems to be holding for future distribution?
Yeah, thanks for, I forgot to mention that. Thank you, Gedalia. So as part of the development for the tip, the council decided to create block pins for the funding for future years. There's some funding in a very little bit in fiscal year 25, and then I believe all the targets are full for all three funding sources for 26 and 27. So we will hopefully look to do a call definitely for the off-system bridge funding. We've talked about that a little bit. We need to update the tip solicitation. There's not been a solicitation with OCTC since I believe sometime in the early 2000s. So we really need to update that process. And we've kind of talked with members at previous meetings that we'll look to do that, really start that immediately after the tip is adopted. So possibly fall 2022, we'll start that process. And then for the CMAC and STBG large urban, we can also possibly do a call for that. Typically, the funding there's just been a lot of funding shortages, as we mentioned, with some of those trends we've seen with projects going way over the estimation, coming back for bids. So at a future date, the members can decide if they want to use that for existing projects to assist members and project sponsors, or if they want to go out for a call. But for now, that is block funding in the draft tip.
Thank you for that clarification. One other point of clarification. You mentioned earlier, and it's specifically relevant within the narrative, the idea of environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. This is a new phenomenon that was mostly born in the bipartisan infrastructure bill and in other big pieces of legislation within the current congressional term. And there is no clear definition yet what criteria are used to define which community falls within an environmental justice. The state, when they did the PEL study for redoing the 17 and all the improvements of adding a lane, they used a criteria which was broader than the current narrative has outlined. And because of that, more federal funding will be made available to those communities, to the ACTAC to distribute, because if it has more environmental justice communities within the ACTAC. The current draft, the current reading, has a very narrow definition, basically making only Middletown and Newburgh fall within the definition. But there are other definitions out there used by multiple state agencies, by DEC, by NYSERDA, and others.
Yeah.
I urge the ACTAC to take a broader reading of the environmental justice and make itself more open for more federal funding coming into the ACTAC because of that, and then having more money to distribute to more communities if more communities fall within the environmental justice area.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I do want to clarify. So environmental justice was actually established in an executive order in 1994, and it's defined, it's federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. So what the environmental justice does is it looks to identify and address disproportionately high and adverse human or health and environmental impacts on low-income and minority populations. So for the TIP narrative, we used the guidelines of that environmental justice executive order just to analyze where projects are and in relation to these areas. We use census tracts for that. And so this is something that the OCTC has been doing for years. You know, it is a requirement as part of the TIP narrative. So when you were mentioning with the funding, that's actually there is a disadvantaged communities, I guess, proportion in the environmental, what is it called, Justice 40 communities that came out of the bill and this new, I guess, presidency, which is different than environmental justice. And they do have different criteria. And I do believe that some of the funding is tied to those communities. And so those are it's kind of its own thing. So it's not the same as the environmental justice communities. So with this, we are not trying to limit funding to just the environmental justice areas. We're looking to ensure that the projects that are in the environmental justice areas are not disproportionately affecting low-income and minority communities. And that kind of comes out of, I guess, the Robert Moses days of, you know, creating the highway through a community, you know, in the Bronx and whatnot. So we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen again, I guess, on a high level.
So let me just add to that. The 1994 executive order is quite old, and if you catch up on reading on the bipartisan infrastructure and other new legislation coming out from the Biden administration and from the current Congress, they're a lot more liberal and they have a lot more criteria to it. We have invested a lot to study on the issue for different agencies, for EPA, for DOT, and we would gladly submit to you our findings. So I think relying on a 1994 executive order, which was a lot more limited than the current trend is, would limit the resources that ACTAC would be receiving, because they're set aside on a federal level that if an ACTAC, if an MPO shows that it has a higher percentage that fits the eligibility, that would be more money coming into the OCTC.
Gedalia, if I'd welcome the opportunity to, if you could share that information with us, so we can take that into consideration.
Okay, and I did submit public comments today with some of the pointers on that. But if you want to dig in more to the wording and other processes pertaining to this, I would gladly put you guys in touch with the planner that we have retained for this purpose.
Okay, yeah, I'd welcome that opportunity.
Yeah, and I will add too, we do look at transportation vulnerable populations as well. And so that includes limited English proficiency policies or LEP populations, individuals living with disabilities, low income households. So that's 50% of the county median income, household income, individuals age 65 plus, individuals with less than a high school diploma, and zero car households. So we have identified these populations as transportation vulnerable, and we're including these maps in the appendix of the TIP narrative. They're also included in the public participation plan. So we do consider other transportation vulnerable populations as well, and we encourage members to, you know, view these maps when you are bringing projects along. so you know, yeah.
Okay, with that, are there any other members from the public that have comments?
Just want a question for clarity.
Yeah.
The Shenandoah Trail grants, what were those originally slated for, 17, 18, 19? Those originally for?
They were not.
Well, they weren't actually, sorry, I'll jump in. They weren't actually grants. They were apportionments is really the correct term from then, and they weren't in a grant yet. So it's locked them up in a grant, so we didn't lose them. Because they're good, 5007 funds are good for year of apportionment plus 5.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure because it said grant. I was like, what grant was that? I don't remember that.
Yeah, that's Rob's, it's kind of a forma allocation. And we are working, we are working to develop a pipeline of projects.
I like grants, some of your own. Make sure.
So do we, but apportionments are even nice.
Thank you.
Any other public comment, questions from the board? If not, on behalf of the board, MPO staff, I want to thank all the attendees and anyone that made public comment. And with that, this will conclude the TIP public presentation.